Welcome. Come inside. Have a seat. The witching hour is upon us. It's time to remove the old cobwebs from the book. Let the sounds and the stories take you deep into the forest where the nightmares await you. An hour had gone by, and the rain was really starting to come down, when suddenly the shovel struck wood. Sam looked around at the hole he and Tasha had dug. Only 4 feet. They buried her only 4 feet, he thought to himself. Hold the shovel and the flashlight, Sam said, as he dropped down and started pulling the dirt and mud away from the casket lid. He could see and feel there were broken pieces of wood from the casket as he pushed the dirt away. Sam stood up and grabbed the flashlight and shined it downward. There in front of him was the old wooden casket. He could see the rain running into it from the holes in the lid. "Give me the crowbar." Tasha said, "No, this one is mine," as she pushed Sam to the side. As Sam climbed out, he could hear Tasha hitting the side of the lid with a crowbar. He could hear the wood cracking and splitting open as she pried into it. Suddenly the lid cracked open, and dust and grayish-white hair flew out of it. Tasha started to cough along with Sam. "Oh my God," she said. "The smell is overwhelming." "Give me that crowbar," Sam said. Tasha reached up and handed it to him, then climbed out of the hole. Sam jumped back down and planted his feet on both sides of the dirt, then bent down and grabbed the lid. He pulled as hard as he could. The first try didn't work, but the second one did. The old rotten coffin lid began to open with a loud creaking and cracking sound. Finally, the lid was open. Sam grabbed the flashlight from his pocket and aimed it downward. "Oh my God," he said under his breath. There, laying in front of both of them, was Amy's body. Her pink dress was ripped and covered in cobwebs. Her long black hair had turned somewhat gray and was full of spiders. The skin on her face had all but fell off. She still had one eye that was closed, and the other was gone. Nothing but an empty socket hole, surrounded by rotten muscle and flesh. Her nose was half gone, with an empty socket showing. The flesh around her mouth was rotten and cracked open and fell apart. Her jawbone and some of her teeth could be seen. Part of her skull could also be seen, where the flesh was rotten and worms were crawling inside the hole. Sam aimed the light downward at her hands. Her arms were rotten and the skin was green-colored and covered with cobwebs. Suddenly, something shined in the light. Sam bent down and took a closer look, removing some of the webs from her hands. There it was, the ring. Sam just smiled as he turned his head. He saw something else. "Oh, she had a teddy bear," he said, laughing as he grabbed it. It was covered in webs and wet and ragged looking from all the rain. "Hey baby, catch," Sam said as he threw the teddy bear upwards toward Tasha. Tasha caught the teddy bear, then threw it back down at the ground. "Ugh, I don't want that nasty thing." Sam laughed and reached down and picked up Amy's hand. "Sorry, old girl, you don't need this anymore," he said as he started jerking and prying the ring off her finger. As the ring came off, so did some of her flesh around her finger. "Ugh, you nasty hag," he said, slinging her flesh back down onto her dress. Suddenly, a loud crack of thunder rolled across the sky. And the lightning lit up the darkness. Sam looked down as the lightning struck. Amy's eye was now open, looking right at him. "What the hell?" he yelled, jumping back and crawling out of her grave. Tasha laughed and said, "Calm down." Her eye opened from the pressure you were using, jerking on her finger. Sam brushed the dirt and mud off his pants and grabbed the teddy bear and the crowbar. They turned and started walking off when Sam stopped and turned back around. "Here you go, you nasty-looking hag. You forgot this." Sam threw the crowbar down into the grave. The crowbar struck the casket, then landed on Amy's chest. Sam stood there laughing, then spit down into the grave. Thunder rolled across the sky as Tasha yelled, "Let's go, Sam!" He turned and grabbed Tasha's hand as they ran back toward the house. Once inside, they went from room to room, looking for more stuff to steal. "This house is empty," Tasha said as she walked from a small room that was once the kitchen. "Let's check upstairs," she said. As they ran up the staircase, the upper half of the house didn't have but 3 rooms, and all 3 were bedrooms. The first bedroom was completely empty. Nothing but dust and dirt filled it. The second room had a small dresser and a bed that was broken down and leaning to one side. The ceiling was leaking and the rain was dripping onto the bed. "Great," Sam said to himself. "There was one more room down at the end of the hall," Tasha said. They started walking toward it slowly. As they got to the door of the room, they noticed words carved into the wood of the old door. Sam reached up and brushed the webs and dust away from the words. He looked at Tasha. "Does that say what I think it does?" She shook her head. They both turned and looked at the door again. They were standing in front of Amy's room. They pushed the door open slowly and walked inside. One small dresser and a stand-up mirror stood in the corner and on the right side of the room. Next to the window was a bed. The bed was old and dusty, but still standing, and the ceiling wasn't leaking. "We will sleep here tonight," Sam said, as he walked over to the bed. He reached down and pulled the old dust-covered sheets back. Dust filled the air. Tasha walked over to the dresser and opened the drawers. She reached in and pulled out his small dress. Sam turned and looked at her. "Hey, what do you think?" Sam turned and looked at her as she held the dress up against herself. He just shook his head. "It's not your color," he said, laughing. Tasha dropped the dress on the floor and then stepped on it with her muddy shoes. She walked over to Sam. "Let me see that ring." Sam reached into his pocket and pulled the ring out, then shined the light down onto it. They both smiled as the diamonds and ruby shined in the light. The thunder rumbled. And lightning flashed all around the house, and the rain began to pour down. "I don't know about you, but I am tired," Sam said. "Let's call it a night and try to get some rest." Tasha shook her head. "What about that old thing?" she replied, pointing at the teddy bear. Sam picked it up and held the light up to it. Guess I'll keep the old raggedy thing. It might be worth something, you never know," he said, slinging the teddy bear onto the bed. They bent down, took off their shoes, and climbed in the bed. A few hours had gone by when the two of them were sound asleep. The storm was still overhead, and rain was pouring down. Suddenly, a bolt of lightning struck near the house, waking Sam up. Then another bolt struck again. This time it didn't strike near the house. It struck the crowbar he had thrown into the casket. Lightning flew from the crowbar and circled all inside the casket, crawling all over Amy's body. Suddenly another bolt came down and hit the crowbar again. This bolt of lightning was bigger and louder than the last. The crowbar sparked from the jolt, and the lightning lit up the casket as it crawled and swirled its way around Amy's body again. Slowly, Amy's chest began to move up and down. Her fingers began to move back and forth when she took a deep breath. Her green yellowish-colored eye began to move around. Her bony, meat-covered hand began to move slowly, as if she was searching for something. She slid her hand over the crowbar, then picked it up and looked at it. She threw the crowbar down at the end of her casket as her hands started moving around. She was searching for her teddy bear. Suddenly, what was left of her brain fired an image of Sam standing at the top of the grave. He was holding Ellie. Amy's hands reached out and grabbed the casket. As she started pulling herself upwards, her bones began to crack and pop with every movement. Slowly, her hands came up out of the grave as she gripped the ground and started pulling herself upwards. After she had crawled out of that hole, she stood up slowly and looked all around. The rain was pouring down and was washing all the cobwebs and dirt out of her long hair. She stood there looking at the ground when she raised her head.
Where's my teddy bear?
She turned her head and looked toward the old house when she saw a light coming from the bedroom window. Sam was up and walking around with the flashlight. Amy started walking toward the house.
I want Ellie back.
As she stepped up on the porch, she could see the door was kicked open. She stepped inside. Her footsteps made a wet, squishing sound from the rain and mud they were covered in. She walked over to the stairs slowly as her dress dragged across the floor. Amy grabbed the railing of the staircase and looked upwards.
Why did you take her from me?
Sam jerked his head sideways when he heard her voice. "What the hell was that?" Sam said out loud. "Tasha, get up." Tasha raised up looking all around. What is it?" "Someone is coming up the stairs," Sam said. "What do you mean someone is coming up the stairs?" she said as she grabbed her flashlight. Suddenly, Tasha heard the footsteps as they were coming down the hallway. Sam grabbed the teddy bear as he told Tasha to get under the bed. She dropped down and crawled under it. Sam went to the closet and jerked the door open and got inside. The doorknob to Amy's room turned slowly, and the door began to open. Amy stepped inside.
Where's Ellie?
Tasha placed her hand over her mouth so she wouldn't scream. She could see Amy's dress and part of her bony, muscle-covered leg as it came toward the bed. Amy stood next to the bed looking all around the room. Sam was squatted down watching through the keyhole. He shook with fear as he saw what once lay in that casket was now standing at the edge of the bed. Tasha lay there trying not to make a sound when a roach crawled onto her arm. She jerked her arm sideways and made a thud sound on the floor. Amy jerked her head downward. Then she reached down and grabbed the bed and yanked it upwards. Tasha screamed in terror as she looked up. And saw Amy reaching down for her. Amy grabbed Tasha by the throat and picked her up. She stood there holding Tasha up, looking at her face to face.
I want my teddy bear.
Suddenly the closet door flew open and Sam ran out. He stood there for a second looking at Amy as she was holding Tasha up by the throat. Amy jerked her head sideways and looked at Sam. She saw that in his right hand, he held Ellie.
I want my teddy bear.
Sam turned and ran from the room. Amy turned back and looked at Tasha. Tasha tried to scream, but it didn't work. Amy squeezed her throat till her neck cracked. Sam ran down the hallway and started down the stairs when he slipped on all the mud that had come from Amy's feet. Sam fell headfirst down the stairs. As his body tumbled down the stairs, he broke his left arm and both his legs. His body hit the floor with a loud thud. He laid there spitting blood from his mouth as he pushed himself up against a wall. He raised up. There at the top of the stairs stood Amy. He sat there watching her as she came down the stairs slowly. She raised her hand up and pointed at him.
You took her
Sam turned his head, and there on the floor in front of him sat the teddy bear. Sam started crying. "We didn't mean to take it. We just wanted the ring. You can have her back." As Amy stepped off the bottom step, she walked over and picked up Ellie. She held her tight to her chest and looked upwards. Then she turned and started toward the doorway. As Amy got to the front door, the thunder rolled across the sky. She stood there with her back towards Sam, holding her teddy bear in her left hand. She stepped out onto the porch. The rain began to pour down onto her. Sam sat there breathing heavily as he watched her standing in the rain, when he heard something.
She belongs to me.
Amy turned back around slowly and came back into the house. Sam yelled as she came towards him.
She belongs to me.
3 days had gone by when the local sheriff pulled up into the driveway. The barmaid in town had told him about the couple wanting to know about the house and the ring. As the sheriff got out, he saw the car still sitting there. He could also see shoe prints in the mud, leading back towards the gravesite. He drew his gun from his holster and walked toward the woods. As he got close to the grave, he could see it had been dug up. He ran over to it and looked inside. "Oh my God," he thought to himself as he placed his hand over his mouth. There, laying in the casket, was Sam, or what was left of him. Both his eyes were missing, and his entire jawbone had been ripped off. 3 crows sat in the casket feeding off him. The sheriff stood there looking at Sam, but couldn't believe what he was seeing. Suddenly, he turned his head slowly because something caught his ear. The sound he heard was coming from the old house. Once inside the house, the sound was louder and was coming from upstairs. The sheriff went up the staircase slowly and then walked down the hallway. The sound was coming from the last bedroom on the right. He pushed the door open and looked inside. There, laying on the floor, was Tasha's body. He stepped inside because the sound he was hearing was coming from the corner of the room. He stood there in shock with his hand over his mouth. His mind couldn't even comprehend what he was looking at. There on the side of the bed, swaying back and forth, was Amy. She was holding Ellie in her arms like a small child and was humming as she swayed back and forth. Amy turned her head slowly and looked at the sheriff. Tears rolled down his face when Amy spoke.